I would just say CN is unbiblical. On the surface, I tend to like Christian nationalism. In fact, when I first heard about it, I was all in. However, the more I interacted with the proponents of this ideology, the more I read about it, and the more I prayed and meditated on the topic myself, the more I realized how wrong I was. And so here is my critique of Christian nationalism.
Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Welcome back to the podcast. We're going to talk about Christian nationalism today with my friend Lucas Cole. Lucas and I, we've been friends for a long time. We talk about deep topics. And so any topic Lucas is willing to come on the podcast to discuss, I'm like, I'm all in. Let's do it. So you've kind of been on a journey, a Christian nationalist
Yeah,
journey.
The first time you and I talked about this topic, I was arguing in favor of Christian nationalism, and you were defending, let's say, the anti-position of Christian nationalism.
The truth. Yeah.
The truth.
You can just call it that.
And I was just like vehemently like, no, you don't understand. And now I reached out to you. I'm like, hey man, I think there's something wrong with this Christian nationalism thing. We need to talk about it.
Yes. Well, I always love when people come around to my positions. That's always a sign of
you
progress.
had nothing to do with it, right?
Well, this is a very interesting topic, and I don't think it's actually easy to it's not super easy to refute. I mean, there's some good arguments for it.
That's right.
Yeah, I would love to dive into some of your thoughts. So Lucas took some time, jotted down some thoughts in a document, kind of a one pager. So I just thought it'd be cool for him to kind of walk through that, and then if you could give it any color as well in terms of your story or changes or
Yeah. So, as we alluded to before, I when I first heard about Christian nationalism, and it wasn't branded Christian nationalism when I first heard about it. I think it was really more the first kind of semblance of a Christian nationalist kind of idea was the 7 Mountain Mandate. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
You've probably heard about this, right?
Yes.
And that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
I'm like, why should Christians like cede all this ground to people that are just going to make life worse for everybody when we could do something that makes everything better, right?
Can I give a quick, for people who may have not heard of this 7 Mountain Mandate, so I'll tell you that just my understanding of the story. So I think it was Lauren Cunningham who started YWAM and Bill Bright who started Campus Crusade were having a meeting the next day, and they both claimed to have the same dream.
Yes.
Right. And so they got together and they were like, whoa, what does this mean? The leaders of, arguably the two greatest youth movements within sort of evangelical Christianity were getting together, and they were like, God speaking. And these 7 mountains, it was sort of like, one was like the economy.
Yeah. The seven centers of influence of a society. So it's it's family, religion, education, entertainment, law, business, maybe that was all of them.
Yeah.
And arts or something like that, right? So what places influence society the most are the 7 mountains.
Yeah. Great. So you heard that, you're like, okay, so if God's speaking and saying we need to exert more influence,
yes,
then okay, that's something we should figure out. What does that look like?
Because, I think maybe it's also like a little bit of a reaction to this idea that has circulated in many denominations where there should be zero political aim of the church. Like we should just, let politics be politics, like government be government. We're not going to be Republican. We're not going to be Democrat. Let's just kind of bury our head in the sand and hope that stuff doesn't bother us. And now we're like looking at it and we're going, no, it's bothering us. I mean, it's like, it's doing damage on all, on our children and whatnot. So to your point, it's very attractive, right? I mean, the idea that we should take back our nation, something like that is very attractive. So it got me hook, line, and sinker, baby. I mean, I was all in. I was like, I went down the rabbit hole far. And I wrote essay after essay. It captured my imagination big time. Okay. And it wasn't until probably maybe in the last year or so that not only just in my own thinking that I start to kind of go, this feels like it's got holes in it, and I was kind of ignoring those holes because I was so darn excited about this thing, right? And then really it was when I started to see other people picking it up, and I started to see influencers and thought leaders and whatnot, and I started to see like where the Christian nationalist thought takes somebody, right? And that was when I was like, oh boy, this is bad. Like, this is not good. And that was when I reached out to you, like, hey, can we talk about this? Because, and part of this is too, I enjoy talking to you. I enjoy having conversations about this stuff because to some degree, I'm still trying to formulate my own thinking around it as well. Mm-hmm. And to your point, many times when I've sat down to try to refute it, I can't, because I'm like, I still keep coming back to, you know, we should make disciples of the whole earth. And well, that includes the government. And so what the heck, you know? And so this is my best, you know, this is again, a work in process here, but here's where this is the essay that I sent to you, the short one pager that is kind of an outline of my views right now. So Stephen Wolfe, in his book, A Case for Christian Nationalism, defines Christian nationalism as a totality of national action consisting of civil laws and social customs conducted by a Christian nation as a Christian nation in order to procure for itself both earthly and heavenly good in Christ. And I put that in here just because like that, okay, there's the definition of Christian nationalism. That's what it is, right? So it's a Christian nation acting as a Christian nation through a totality of action, national action consisting of laws and customs that are through this Christian lens, okay? Christian nationalism, to me, seems to be a reaction to woke Christianity and liberalism in general that has corrupted the morals of the U.S., a country that, in the Christian nationalist eyes, was founded and rose to prominence on a bedrock of Christian values. I say it's a reaction because even, you know, some people are referring to Christian nationalism as the woke right at this point. So it's kind of like the overreaction to the woke left. On the surface, I tend to like Christian nationalism. In fact, when I first heard about it, as I just got done saying, I was all in. Our country is seemingly going to hell in a handbasket, and of course, Jesus is the answer. It's time for Christians to stop being so passive and to take this country back for Christ. Sign me up. A while ago, I had learned about something called the Seven Mountain Mandate, a framework which we just discussed and talked about, a framework for Christianity to reclaim culture by infiltrating the seven centers of culture. This resonated with me, and so Christian nationalism was a logical extension of this approach. However, the more I interacted with the proponents of this ideology, the more I read about it, and the more I prayed and meditated on the topic myself, the more I realized how wrong I was. And so here is my critique of Christian nationalism after a rather deep inquiry into the topic. I'll refer to it as CN going forward. Christian nationalism is CN. CN as a movement within Christianity, I believe, is wrong and should be avoided by all well-intentioned Christians for the following reasons. One, CN is a fantasy appeal to youthful masculinity that distracts from true kingdom work. Apart from an authentic revival led by the Holy Spirit, the achievement of a truly kingdom-oriented national expression is simply fantasy. All of human history supports the preposterousness of the idea of a lasting, righteous Christian government. CN appeals to young men who are tired of being bullied by progressive liberalism. It isn't an authentic call to true kingdom work. It's a trendy, audience-building strategy heralded by would-be influencers looking to make a name for themselves. CN replaces the difficult task of denying our flesh, preaching the gospel, and making faithful disciples with a political power play dressed up as kingdom work.
Okay. Maybe we can, yeah. So you got a couple more points, but just to make sure we're teasing out this one, you're kind of combining two things. You're saying, look, the sort of the method of spreading the good news of Christian nationalism has been to sort of grab control of the youthful, masculine kind of the manosphere, the evangelical manosphere. So you kind of object to the method, and sort of the essence of this point is that it's distracting from real kingdom work. Okay, so that it's not just, so you don't like the method it's using, although then the rejoinder could be, well, what if it was done by elders who were very carefully and thoughtfully. Right. And then your point would be, it's then it's actually a distraction. It's not. How would you?
Yeah,
how would-
it's I would say it like this. Christian nationalism is to the kingdom what like it's almost like pornography to real intimacy. Okay. It's like sex is real. Sex is a part of an intimate relationship. Rulership is real. Like people in the church ruling and reigning is real. Like it's a real part. It's the method, it's the order with which you go after these things. It's like somebody who just only focuses on wanting to have sex, right? And so, let's just go have sex. Like that's what they're thinking about. Well, it appeals to a part of us that is like, yeah, we want that too, right? But it's out of order. It's not right, right? It's the thing you should be focusing on is the intimacy, the relationship, the commitment, the marriage, the covenant, right? Those are the things you focus on, and then sex is the outcome. Ruling and reigning is an outcome of a process that we partake in with God, that God initiates, and that the outcome is essentially Jesus reigning over the entire earth. But when we try to bring that out of order and we say, no, we need to go do that now, I feel like that's where it breaks down. And that's where I feel like it's a fantasy. It's not real. Like it can't actually happen. It doesn't work that way, but it riles us up so much. Like it tugs at something deep inside of a man that I think is just like, it's really powerful. I mean, it got me where it was like, yeah, why wouldn't we do this? We have to do this. And if your thinking doesn't go past that, it's hard to kind of say, it's hard to find the error in it yourself. You have to step back from it and let it go for a second and then go, yeah, this doesn't feel right to me.
Okay. Yeah, I got some deeper questions, but I think it might be interrelated to your next 2 points. So why don't we go ahead and finish off the essay and then we can kind of look at the big picture.
Yeah. CN conflates political motivations with kingdom concerns. So like one of the things you'll see with people that are kind of proponents of Christian nationalist worldview is a hyper focus on Jewish influence. They tend to, I know this is very interesting to me, but they are like really focused on anything that has to do with the Jews, right? And when I've pressed into it, what I've learned is that it's not coming from a place of like a true kingdom worldview. It's coming from a political worldview. It's a political worldview of isolationism, meaning America should focus on America. And right now, America's too dang focused on Israel. And so we need to break the back of that alliance. And therefore, we'll use Christian nationalism to justify breaking that back. But it's actually coming from a political motivation. It's not a kingdom motivation. It's a political motivation, okay? It disguises every political aim as a kingdom objective and is indicative of the true problem with political power, that it becomes a religion in and of itself, right? That once you kind of adopt the Christian nationalist worldview, then any sort of political policy you can think of is a kingdom policy, right?
It's kind of totalizing in that sense.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then that's when it's like, and which, by the way, I think secular governments try to do too, right? They try. It's more beneficial for the government, for the political party itself to be seen as a church, to seen as a religion, to see it's powerful that way. You actually see that, when you slap Christian nationalism on it, you go, oh yeah, that's what that is. Okay. Do we want to tease that one out, or do we want to move to the next one?
I'll just say real quick, and I hit the next one. I think totalizing ideologies are extremely attractive to young people. So if you can suddenly cause somebody to, through one framework, understand everything, understand how politics work, how governments work, how economies work, it's just like, wow, that you can activate them, because it gives them so much hope that if I understand how things really work and nobody else seems to understand that, then I can save the world.
Yes.
And so that's why totalizing ideologies like Marxism, or even what happened with the woke ideology, or there are brands of this on the right for sure, and this is one of them. Yeah, you always have to be humble about the fact that potentially you have stumbled across something, a variable that is important to consider, but always beware of totalizing that variable and making it explanatory of everything. So
That's right.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that also makes sense of your first point. So yeah, once you hit the
It's what also makes it difficult to refute, because it's like,
right,
well, wouldn't Jesus just do a better job of all this stuff than anybody else? I mean, wouldn't it
yeah,
be better? Wouldn't it be better if it was like,
right,
well, it's hard to say no,
yes,
right? But okay, yeah. So the next point, I would just say CN is unbiblical. The entire Old Testament, I think, is a case study in the futility of focusing on the state as a means of ushering in the kingdom of God. It just doesn't work. Like, corruption bleeds in. And I was thinking about this recently too, about how, God's plan for Israel was to not have a king and to not have a government like that. It was to have laws and elders and judges and whatnot. But yeah, the whole Old Testament is it's a case study on what happens when you try to have when you try to usher in the kingdom through a state. I think Jesus shifted the focus away from the state and toward the individual and the church. And this is probably my this was the line that was hardest for me to walk as I was walking down the Christian nationalism line, is because I don't think that the church should be apolitical. But I don't think it should be totally political, right? And I think this is the line that's been hard for me to figure out. So our political motivations, I believe, are now to be aimed toward the church, not the state. I.e., we should be desiring to become elders that govern the body of Christ, not politicians who govern the body of Christ and people outside the body of Christ.
right,
And I think about what Jesus said, that he says, I will build my ecclesia. I will build my church, right?
right,
That's what Jesus is building, okay? So if we applied the same motivation that CN requires to establishing healthy, righteous, God-fearing communities that leverage economic cooperation to improve the lives of those in the church, I think CN would be unnecessary. And I think one of the reasons why CN is attractive to us is because I think there is a lot of disunity in the body. I mean, we have a bunch of these brands and denominations, even at the neighborhood level, right? So there's zero political cooperation in the actual church, and we're looking for that. And it's like, oh, we can get it at the political level, but it's like, well, no, I think we should be focusing on that at the church level. Okay. And lastly, I would say, I just don't think we need to be focused on those outside the church. And I think a lot of CN Christian nationalism, it's focused on trying to, in a sense, like, stop the bad unbelievers and stop the bad people from hurting us and stuff like that. And I think about what Paul says here is, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside, right?
yeah,
So here again, I think is a call to our focus, and again, I will say our political focus should be inside the body of Christ. It should not be those outside.
Like what you hear? Be sure to leave a rating and review for this podcast wherever you use streaming.
yeah. That's a really interesting observation. That if we understood how political the church really was,
Yes.
we would be spending all of our time working on those internal structures. And I think that the reason why people don't understand that the church is essentially political, in other words, it's a kingdom, it's a parallel kingdom that was always
100%.
designed to function like a governing entity, is because the actual words in the New Testament that explain that have been changed. Like, so ecclesia, it's a very strange translation to use the word church,
Very
right?
strange.
Which, comes from, what is it? The word kirk, the German word that,
German Kirk, yeah.
or the actual building. Whereas
Because
you would-
the building, the temples in that area were circular, and the word Kirk comes from the word circle, right?
Okay.
But so yeah, it was literally, the word church is based on
A
what
building.
the temples looked like
Right.
in that time, right?
a completely separate religious structure. And the word ecclesia, I was just reading a classical book that was translated, and it was before the first century. It was written in ancient Greek, and in this book they were using the word ecclesia a lot, to refer to every time it was a political gathering of some kind.
Yes.
And so the ecclesia, that it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be political, but the most common use of the word ecclesia in ancient Greek was for there to be a gathering of the, like, sort of
Yes.
a body of the village, like everybody comes together. And then you have the word elder, which again, people think of as like, oh, what is that?
Old guy.
That's like a board of directors or something.
Right.
No. That was a governing structure that was over
Yes.
cities or villages, right? That already existed.
I think I had sent this to you a while ago, because I remember when I found this, and I'd encourage anybody listening to this to look this up. If you look up the ecclesia, just on the Wikipedia page, and you read what it is, I'll just read this real fast. It says, the ecclesia of ancient Athens, Greece, which again, at this time, people would have known what that was. Greece was a center of power in the world, right? It was the popular assembly open to all male citizens as soon as they qualified for citizenships. The assembly was responsible for declaring war, military strategy, and electing officials. It was responsible for nominating and electing magistrates and members of their governing body, right? It literally was a government. That's what the ecclesia was. And so when Jesus was using that word, or when it was being written down as that word, this is what would come to their mind when they heard that word.
Yes. Yeah. And even the words like apostle, that was also a secular word that a government would use when it would send somebody out to help, like, reinforce something the empire was doing. They would send an apostle, and the ship that they would sail on would be called an apostolate. And yeah, so these were all very politically charged words. And when Jesus said to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world," he was bringing a kingdom, and this call to make disciples and to disciple the nations, this was a call of one kingdom conquering another. And I think so there's sort of like two elements to this that I'm always wrestling with. And I know when you were, going deeper and deeper in Christian nationalism, you would say, Lucas, and I'm curious how you would answer yourself. Okay. So I really like the diagnosis that a big part of the problem is we don't understand that we think of the church as these branded worship service ministries. And that has created massive confusion that we're not essentially building a parallel kingdom.
That's right.
Okay, so if I believe 100% we should be thinking about things in those regards, and there's so much that could be said about that. However, one of the questions you always asked me was, yeah, but like if this parallel kingdom becomes more and more successful, and you're in a democracy and people are voting for the values they care about, then isn't Christian nationalism sort of just a natural byproduct of good disciple making?
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Well, this is why I said, I'm still working through this, by the way, but this is why I said the first part is why I think it's out of order. Okay. I think I'm okay with it. I think I'm okay with it if that's how it happens. If it's the natural expression of a body of people that are embodying kingdom values, and that body of people is growing. Like, for example, this is the case I would say. Like, if you were to let's say we were able to build that in Cincinnati, okay, and then we just like one day we like moved to some island somewhere.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to like fly secular people in to govern, right?
Oh no, we've achieved Christian nationalism.
That's right, right.
Must fly in.
Like,
Unbelievers.
it's not like required that government has to be unbelievers. I don't think that, right? This is why I think it's just an order problem. I think that when we start with, we need to get power at the secular political government level.
Right.
You've broken something that is really dangerous to break. But if you focus on, let's build the political, and I'll use this word lightly, but the political power structure of the body, and that thing becomes larger and larger and more significant, that it requires a level of governance at that level. Okay. I think I'm okay with that. I don't know. That's where my head's at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good distinction. The thing that I kept on pushing you on was, okay, let's say at a particular city, you have 15% really diehard Christian, people, true disciples of Jesus in a in a community, like a city of 100,000 people. 50% are like really on fire for Jesus. Do you want to seize control of the government of, let's say there's a lot of autonomy in that city? Would those 15,000 Christians want to seize control of the government, get the levers of power, and begin to explicitly lead that city in an organized Christian fashion? Or would you say, no, you guys can run for city council, you can influence as an individual or even as a smaller entity like a family, with the values, but don't overtly call it a Christian takeover of the city. Don't organize at that highest level. Don't get all 15,000 people together and attempt, because the problem that you run into isn't necessarily that wouldn't bless the city, isn't because we don't believe in our values, isn't because we don't necessarily even think that maybe if that were implemented, that it would cause flourishing for everyone, including the non-believers in the city. It actually, the problem I always have with it is it seems like it makes evangelism and discipleship more difficult, because everything is going to be seen by the other 85,000 now as a political power play. And the whole reason why the first should be last, and that Jesus was so adamant about the way that evangelism and discipleship was supposed to happen through like faith, through belief, not through coercive power, is because he wants to woo these people while there's still time back into his kingdom voluntarily. And as soon as you make it political, you make that more difficult. Doesn't make it impossible. Doesn't mean that people can't come to faith. But if that were to happen to me, if there was a Muslim takeover, I mean, it would be, I would immediately identify myself in opposition to that. And so my desire, my ability to cooperate or consider that point of view would actually be reduced. Is that kind of the essence of what you're saying about order?
Yeah. And I think I brought this up. I love the story of Cincinnatus, right? And this order is, I think, a big part of what frustrates me about this topic is, and it's also what makes it difficult for me to draw clear lines in my arguments, because again, I actually think Christians should be ruling, and I think it would be good for Christians to like get the kingdom values in our politics and in our laws and that kind of stuff. But to your point, if we try to take it and we try to go get it, it ruins it. It breaks something, and then it becomes like a war. It becomes like we're fighting a war for it, right? Now, like Cincinnatus, he's sitting there on his farm. He just wants to be a farmer. He's really smart.
Yeah.
And they come to him and they're like, "We're in trouble, and would you take over? Would you lead?" And he's like, "Great, yeah, I'll help you." And he helps them and he saves the city. And they're like, "Great, would you be king now?" And he's like, "No, I'm good." Right? There's something that's like that. It feels like that's Christianity to me to some degree. It's like, we should be so attractive that they want us. They would come to us and ask for help, not that we would like march in and say, "We're here to finally, set you freaking heathen straight." Right? It's just it breaks to me when we go that route.
Yeah. I think the thing here's another argument that I haven't really grappled deeply with, that I think is motivating, and a lot of what you're seeing on the right, even sort of some of the anti-Semitism. So there's a growing consensus that it's still small, but it's growing, that there is no such thing as a democracy. That every democracy, if you just look at the game theoretic reality, that every democracy and every government is always an oligarchy. It's always the rule of an elite. There's always going to be a group of people. There's never not been an oligarchy. And so democracy has always been sort of this thing that pacifies people and allows for some correction without bloodshed. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is electing another oligarchy. You're really bringing into existence a new elite to rule all of us. And I think that if you believe that that's politically true, especially at the scale of the United States, it's just so big. A lot of this was, I think, teased out in the book like the Managerial Revolution. It was written in 1941 by Burnham. Burnham was like, this mid-century sort of philosopher who I think has really convinced a lot of people and has explained what happened, how how suddenly a very small elite group of people on the coast took over the media, took over, so many. They were just in lockstep, like the Academy, like 99%, like even corporations, almost like a vast majority of the actual donations were from CEOs of large companies were given to the one side. There was just a complete consensus, and it didn't make sense to anybody. Like people were like, how did that happen? Like, this is so weird. How did you get to a place that 98% of people in the humanities are all thinking the same way? How did this groupthink happen? And basically, this sort of theory that there's this oligarchy that's created, this elite group of people, they take over and then they rule us, and that the only way to really respond to that is to kind of organize, right? And so, like, going back to my example of like in a city with 100,000 people. So it's one thing to say, which I completely, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd say, please, like, yes, those 15,000 Christians that are in that town, don't organize, like, spread the gospel, like, live into the kingdom of God, in authentic ways, show hospitality, serve people, like, do not use power.
Yeah.
But the argument that now is being made is, but you have to then imagine that, let's say there's 5,000 people that would organize in that city, and they take over every single like lever of power that there is. And then they use that power to like exert and bring in all kinds of like basically sinful ideology into the city. At that point, does the 15,000 Christians say, well, there's only 5,000 of them. We're constantly suffering. They're now like forcing our children to go to their schools. Like where is this headed? Like people are being, abortion, and like there's all these arguments. Right. At what point does the 15,000 people say, look, just because we love this city of 100,000 people, we have to organize politically? And that's the argument that I hadn't really thought deeply about. Like, first of all, is that true? Like, is every political system at its base an oligarchy of the small group of people willing to organize? And if that is true, then if Christians refuse to organize, are we handing the culture over to another sort of, or more like maybe even a smaller but organized group of activists that will over time just infect all the institutions? And do we not just see that happen? Like, this is their argument. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, there's another aspect of this that I think highlights for me that has been difficult for me to articulate. But it's something like, let's play that out. They've got 5,000, we've got 15,000. They're vying for all these positions of political power. We start vying for those positions of political power. Do you think they're going to fight fair? You think they're just going to play by the rules and be like, well, we'll just leave the elections up to, the people? No, they're probably going to start cheating. They're probably going to start lying.
Right.
They're probably going to start doing some nefarious things, puts us at a disadvantage.
Right.
Now, okay, so this started off with, we don't want to be at a disadvantage. We don't want to let these people go. Well, now they're changing the rules. Do we keep changing the rules? Do we go, well, you know what? Then we should start lying, cheating, and stealing, because we can't let these 5,000 people get power, right? And then they kill one of our people. Well, okay, well, then we need to kill one of their people, right? I can't see a world where if you play that game, it doesn't lead to murder. Like, it doesn't lead to war. Like, that is that game. Like, you want to play that power game, you better be ready to kill somebody, because they will do it to you.
Yes.
And if you're not willing to use those same tools, you're not going to win, right? And I think there's part of me that's, as much as I agree with the hypothesis of like, you can't let that happen because it would be bad for people, I can't get on board with the strategy. I go, play it out, guys.
You see where it leads. And this, to me, what you're articulating, what sounds to me theologically like a classic Anabaptist perspective. And I have so much like sympathy for that perspective. Anabaptists are pacifists. At the sort of the purest level, they have made a political calculation. And, Amish are Anabaptists, Mennonite are Anabaptists. I mean, these are really radical Anabaptists. And that's why, until this last election, Amish wouldn't vote, because to them, it does it does put you on the slippery slope to violence.
It's that game.
Yeah,
It's
like,
the- it's
we're not
essentially
playing the
that-
game.
Right.
And if you want to like exert, if these 15,000 people or 5,000 people in our city make life unlivable for us, we move, we leave, we flee. Jesus says that, right? Famously, and I think Matthew 24, if they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. He's like, look, he doesn't give us the option to form an army. He doesn't give us the option to organize around violence. And so we got to somehow get off that train before it gets too far down the tracks. And so the way they have done it historically, Anabaptists, is there's sort of a spectrum of those who and I think it is fair to say, I don't know, Lucas, if you would maybe concede that what if there was really, really good theology around where those limits are? And I think that's kind of where most people
yes,
are.
I agree, because
Like,
I
we
think
can
that's
vote, we can, but
yes.
we don't like play dirty. Like, how do is that possible?
That's the hard part. Again, because I'm like, if Jesus didn't say those things, like, then I would be like, yeah, that we just look, I mean, how many times in the Old Testament did God use Israel to strike down, enemies and all that kind of stuff? Like, if we didn't have those words of Jesus, I wouldn't have this tension.
Right.
Like, I would just be like, yeah, take over.
Yes.
Right? Like, don't. But those words of Jesus are loud, and it sounds like our King has a different strategy. He knows something about this game that we don't, and he's trying to tell us, like, you won't win if you play that way. Right. But there's another way that we can win, and it's this way. Right.
Well, laying down your life, like literally dying. Like,
there it is.
Like, I think that one of the things that Jesus seemed to indicate was that martyrdom is a critical component for how evangelism takes over a culture, is that people are willing to lay down their lives. And yeah, that's that. If
there's I'm watching the Vikings of Valhalla right now, which is fantastic, by the way. But it's got a huge component of this. Like, I didn't know this, but a lot of Vikings became Christian at some point, and they were very influential in spreading the gospel through conquest, right? And there's this scene where this really bad Christian Viking named Olaf finally gets killed, and the person that kills him says, I beat you. And he says, you didn't beat me. You've made me a martyr. And, it's like, he understood, right? He understood the power of that.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that our King has given us different tools. And I think that those tools are really uncomfortable for us. I mean, even for me to say, yeah, that's what I would do. If all of a sudden things got really bad here, I would just move. And if not, when they kill me, then they kill me. Like, it's hard to actually say that and believe that, but those are the instructions.
Yes. And I think a big part of your argument, both with the young men and kind of this rise of anti-Semitism that's growing on the right, is I think what you're saying is that when you begin to believe that primarily what's happening is this is a political game of organizing these kind of elite teams, and therefore we got to figure out who our team is,
Yes.
what are they? They're Christian? Are they white? Are they, like what are the variables that make somebody a part of our team? And so then people, and then of course that causes you to then see everyone else as a part of an identity group. And this is kind of like, I think that woke right concern that's going on. And I think that, it's interesting that the gospel is not supposed to be identified like that, right? We infiltrate like a virus, right? Jesus used the word yeast, is a little bit more friendly, but like we so I think that here's another counter, maybe more aligned with the way of Jesus, is that, okay, if you've got those 15,000 people, and you are finding that your salt and light is you're losing your saltiness, like you're losing control of this city of 100,000 people, because these 5,000 people who are organizing and politically savvy are beginning to drive the entire city down. It seems like then you do have a solution to this problem, which is you got to go share the gospel with them. Like you need to win some of them over. Like what you ought to do as the kingdom is say, are we making disciples well? Are we multiplying? Is this 15,000 people going to become 20,000? Is this 20,000 going to become 25,000? And if some of those people that are beginning to be discipled in this movement, won't some of them naturally come from that 5,000? Isn't the Holy Spirit powerful enough to speak to some of those and convict some of those people and bring them bring them about. And so, but as soon as it becomes left, right, political, identity, that's what I'm saying. It seems like that strategy no longer makes sense. Like instead of organizing and saying we need to spread the gospel, we're burning up all of our resources on political action,
which is that distraction point. I think it's a distraction because, and I think behind what you just said, I think this is where Jesus's words come out, and it's like, and just watch what happens if they kill one of you. Like if, because you're sharing the gospel and you're being so loving to these people, they kill one of you, watch how fast the gospel spreads after that happens. Like it's a powder keg that's ready to explode. But if they kill you because you're fighting for political power, doesn't happen. Yeah. Like nobody sees it that way and it kills it. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's a distraction to your point. I think I see it when I talk to guys and I start to see that they're getting caught by it. I can see it. It's like, oh my God, it's taking over them. Like it's taking over their thinking. And what is it from your perspective, Jeremy? Why does all Christian nationalism roads seem to lead to like Hitler and hating Jewish people? Like what is it? Is
because
it that
they're an elite group? So
it's that oligarchy thought.
Yes, I think we have to give the devil his due, and I think it's important to actually concede this point about oligarchy. I think that's an actual. I think
it's real. It is there,
true.
And the Jews are controlling the country.
Well, not necessarily the Jews, but we did see an elite group of people take over all the institutions. We lived through this. We just went through it. It's like we saw it during COVID. I mean, it was just like unbelievable the lockstep that these people were in. And so yeah, we know that happens. We know that just happened, and that's starting to get disrupted politically. Not necessarily because of Christian nationalism, but it's getting disrupted. And I think that the Jews have always been a scapegoat when people have realized that they are under the thumb of some kind of cabal, some kind of hidden secret conspiracy, some kind of elite group. And then they notice that because Jewish people do tend to be successful relative to the general population, it's easy to imagine that they're involved in some kind of conspiracy against the rest of us. And that's why I can't stand this kind of identitarianism. A lot of these things are ideologically driven. They're really not ethnically,
and it becomes ineffective to be able to be as clear as you can be with who the enemy is.
Right.
It's a very effective recruitment strategy. Like we know exactly who the enemy is.
Yes.
And it's these people.
Yeah. It's so powerful to say, okay, guys, we're going to form, our team. We're Team Christian. We're going to put on our jerseys and we're going to go to war. And young men are built for that at some level, built to want to figure out who their team is. And this is why, the words of Jesus were so difficult for the disciples. This was a group of young men who were like, when are we going to do it? Like, can we call down fire on those guys? I mean, they were just like ready to rock. They could not wait for Jesus to like come out.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden he dies and they are completely disillusioned. It's just like, what just happened? Like we lost everything.
Yeah.
We were the suckers. And all of a sudden they realized, and this is what's so powerful about the resurrection, right? The crucifixion and the resurrection, but to your point, it's got to go through the crucifixion. I think a lot of young men have to be very careful that they absorb the lesson of the crucifixion and don't just skip over that and say, the resurrection. But one of the things that, I think people have really challenged, and I think in that 7 Mountain Mandate, they have pointed out, and I'm curious where the line you would draw here is are we told to disciple nations? Should we be, let's say we don't organize politically, but shouldn't we be organizing like in an influence way? Or should we be organizing our evangelism to point at certain elements of culture? Like how do we handle the 7 Mountain Mandate if it isn't Christian nationalism? Have you thought about like, is there an appropriate way to do that? Or do we just stay kind of, in the background as a small minority that is attempting to grow just purely organically?
Yeah. Well, I remember when we were reading the Puritan Hope during our postmillennialism book study. I think that their focus on revival was really intriguing to me, right? And I think that maybe I don't think about revival enough. I think about strategies and tactics and executing plans and all that kind of stuff. And which really lends itself more to like a Christian nationalist worldview of like, let's go, politically, organize and whatnot. But I think we have to have a lot of room for revival. And I think that, if you take any of these kind of macro concepts, Christian nationalism, a totality of a state, and you break it down to, let's say, one school, and you say, hey, if the gospel so penetrated a school that every single teacher, principal, assistant, everybody was a Christian, great.
Yeah.
Like, I'm okay with that. And if that happened at the school district level, and if that happened at the city council level, so again, it's an order of operations for me. Like, it's not that I would say, again, like if that ever happened, you'd have to like disband the school and say, we can't be in charge. But it can't be, it just can't be the goal. It can't be what we're shooting for. What we're shooting for is for the gospel to go forth and transform people's hearts and restore them back to God. And if everybody in a particular area that happens to, great, right? And that should be our focus. So if that's the national level, awesome, right? But you got to keep that order of operations clear.
Yeah, revival.
Are you following us on Facebook and Instagram yet? Look up @Family Teams to get even more free content and never miss out on event announcements.
One more kind of like, I feel like, question that, to me, it seems like the gateway into all of this organizing is likely been abortion in the last like 30 or 40 years. So, basically the argument is they're murdering people, the most helpless people in society. So let's just assume like that's the good faith position of millions of Christians. And so if this were happening on the streets, if they were just rounding up 2-year-olds and killing them, like, would we organize? And so, and I've noticed that people that really want to get people on this train, or that are deep on this train, have really felt that issue at such a visceral level. Like, we have to do something about, like, God is going to judge us. This is unjust. Every society should be judged based on how it treats the most vulnerable members of their society. And we have justified the mass killing of all of these babies in utero. Like, what are your thoughts about, are there issues in which the Christians need to like organize at the national or state political level?
I think I would come back to, I haven't thought about this all that much, but I think I would come back to, I think that God will hold us accountable for doing what we could do within the boundaries that He's set for us, right? And so I don't think that the fact that these other people are doing these terrible things would then justify us violating what God has commanded us to do, right? But within what God has commanded us to do, we should be doing everything we possibly can.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that the presence of evil like that changes the rules enough that Christian nationalism becomes okay at that point, right? I think it's still, the gospel is sufficient. We do live in a democracy. We can vote. We can send messages out. We can advocate for certain policies. We can do all of that stuff and do it, right? But if it becomes, let's create a political party that would outlaw it now and ban it and get more and more political power over, and that's when I feel like, no, I still don't think that that's the right path.
And how do you justify, I would say, anybody running as a Christian, like somebody who primarily sees themselves as a Christian? It seems like you create the problems that we're describing when non-believers feel like they were being ruled over by Christians for Christian reasons. I heard a lot of this rhetoric when, like, Mike Pence, people were like saying, "Oh my gosh, look at this guy. He's, Bill Maher." He used to always joke, like, Sam Harris. These guys that are atheists were very much like, they want a theocracy. I know that if they had the levers of power, if Mike Pence became the president, he would suddenly pull the levers in a hyper-Christian direction. And now, me as an atheist, I'm sitting here living in a in essentially a theocracy, and we got to fight that. Like, is that inevitable? Do you think that Christians maybe should avoid public office for that reason, for the gospel's sake?
I again, I kind of keep going back to this almost like the methodology, right? It's like the order of operations. Like, if going back to what I said before, if the gospel so penetrated the hearts and minds of everybody in a certain area and a revival happened such that they changed all the laws to be, more in line with the kingdom, and there happened to be some atheists that lived there, I don't mind. I'm like, yeah, well, then they can move. If they don't really like it, they can move. But it doesn't, to me, it's not like a violation at that point. It's like, it's
So you would say,
it's
like, so for
inevitable.
example, look, if they make abortion illegal in Alabama, and Alabama has like way more Christians, I'm not saying they do, but let's say that's the reason, and you're an atheist living in Alabama, look, they have a mandate. Like, we're in a
Yeah.
democracy. Like, move
That's
to
how
California.
that's how it is. That's just how it is. Like, and this is where I think the line that I feel like I keep bumping up against is like, it's not that I don't think that people who are Christians and aspire to kingdom values should never, ever, ever be able to make any rules whatsoever. No, I don't think that. I think it's how they get there and how they try to, potentially, to your point, coerce. And I don't necessarily think that Christian nationalists believe this, but there's a part of me that wonders if it's behind it. It's like, do you actually think that changing the legislation is going to make people like more moral? Like, it's not going to. Like, it never has. Like,
Right.
that's
What's
again
that
the
real
entire
problem?
case study of the law is that the law can't do that, right? You can't change people's hearts. And again, I'm not accusing Christian nationalists of believing that if they just made Christian laws, everybody become Christians. But you can't legislate that stuff away. And so, yeah, I think it keeps coming back to me is, if it is the natural outcome of the correct process, then so be it. But don't violate the process. The Christian nationalist idea, to me, is a flawed methodology. It is a flaw. It is trying to put the ends first and in skipping over the process that Jesus calls us to follow. And in so doing, it distracts us and appeals to a part of us that's no bueno, to me.
Well said. Yeah, I definitely concur that I think the strength of this argument is that we live in a different chapter of the story, and
Yes.
when there was a theocratic chapter of the story in the Old Testament, and it was to create one nation in the world that was living by divine law, and there is going to be a theocratic
That's right.
government in the future when Jesus returns. And in between, we're given this one unusual period in which there are two kingdoms that are living in parallel, one invisible and ruled by Jesus, and those who have been discipled to obey and follow him, and those that are still under the sway of the enemy, and that these two kingdoms are at war, and that because Jesus is reigning and ruling currently over those who have followed him, we have to abide by the boundaries and the processes that he wants. And he wants us to, through serving, through loving, and not through violence, try to bring people into the kingdom, that they can make a voluntary decision, because what brings them into the kingdom is faith. I think that's the thing that really necessitates this strategy or this methodology you're describing. If it's not, you can't force people to say it. They have to believe it, and therefore they have to be wooed. It's got to hit their heart. It's got to be like that moment in the prodigal son story where they suddenly realize their father really loves them and is calling them back into his family. And if they never are given that opportunity because the dad's out there, hunting them, like we're not going to be able to win people to the kingdom.
Yeah, that's right. There's another topic inside of this that I would want to talk to you about. I'm not sure if it would be like podcast worthy. I'd just be kind of curious. I don't know if you want to talk about it, then we can edit it out later, or if you
What
want
is
to.
it?
Well, it's two things, and it has to do with Israel and the Jews. Okay. One thing I've wrestled with is in the Christian nationalist argument is like, we talk about Christian nationalism as really from a United States perspective. Like, we're talking about the United States, right? Which then creates a sense of loyalty to this country as the outcome or the target of our Christian nationalist objectives. And then there's a sense of like patriotism that kind of comes up to the United States. I think I wrestle with that a little bit. Like, are we, I think you and I've talked about this before, but like, are we to have any sort of national loyalty? Like,
Yeah.
or is our loyalty completely to the church, to Jesus's kingdom? And then how does Israel play into that? As Israel as the physical representation, at least, of the kingdom of God from God's perspective. Like when he decided to put his finger on the map and build a nation, he built Israel. Does that necessitate some degree of national loyalty from us? You know, like if he's going to rule from Jerusalem, is that not our capital? Like,
Right.
or how, I'm just, again, we're getting into some muddy waters here where I'm like, you know,
Yes.
somebody could hear what I just said and be like, what are you, anti-American? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just, how do you think about that from a
Man, I would love to go deep. Only got a couple of minutes, but
Okay.
I tweeted like during this last election, as a citizen from another kingdom, I feel no obligation to vote, but I do vote sometimes to help these nice Americans out. So I don't see myself primarily as an American. I don't see how I can. All of my allegiance goes to Jesus. I'm 100% in his kingdom. And so I would say my attitude towards America is one of deep gratitude. I love this country. I love what it stands for. I love its history. I love what it's done for my family. But I did, when I decided to say Jesus is Lord, I don't have any other allegiance left. Like literally, Jesus said, if you don't give up everything you have, you cannot be my disciple. So I took 100% of what I had, and that included my national identity, and I handed it to Jesus. And I really don't see how I can so I don't feel any other allegiances that really pull on me.
So it's not anti-American. It's just my allegiance bucket is full. And
yeah, I
it's
just happen to be from another country, and I'm an immigrant in this country, and I love this country. I'm so glad that we settled here, of all places. But I don't feel nearly the level of identity as an American than I would if I were not a believer in Jesus. But because I'm a believer in Jesus, yeah, I feel like I am literally from another kingdom. I mean, that's what Jesus said. Paul made that clear. You are ambassadors from another kingdom. You are citizens. He even used that word. You are citizens, from another place. So my citizenship, I'm not a dual citizen. I am 100% citizen of the kingdom of God. I represent that kingdom alone. And so in every single decision, I feel like this is me as a Jesus follower. I'm representing my full allegiance to Jesus, but I can engage in civic processes as a follower of Jesus. But I also want to be really careful that that never kind of confuses my heart about who I am. So that's how I think about that.
Well, and how does Israel play into that for you? Does it play into that for you at all in terms of, is Jesus the king of Israel, in the sense of, is Israel the national identity of the physical expression of the kingdom here? Like it's, when he comes back and he's ruling from Jerusalem, are we going to refer to it that way? Is that going to be I don't know. Again, there's a lot of unknowns to me in this.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the most extreme thing Paul says in Romans 11 is something like, with regards to the gospel, they are your enemies. But with regards to, what does he say?
with election.
With regards to election, they're beloved because of the patriarchs. So everyone is feeling that tension. There's the enemy and there's the beloved tension. Paul puts it in one verse, and I got to feel both at the same time. A Talmudic Jew is actively spreading an anti-gospel every time he goes to worship, every time he teaches. And so, they're an enemy with regards to the gospel, but they're beloved with regards to God's election because of his love for Abraham. And so I have deep love for the Jewish people. But from a religious perspective, I don't think it's healthy for us not to be confused about the fact that, Judaism, especially Talmudic Judaism, is not consistent. It's very anti-Christianity. And in terms of Israel as a state, Israel's primarily a secular state. It's going to become a religious state because of demographics. But the thing that's most remarkable to me is that Israel is the ground on which is the primary physical platform on which God's glory is revealed.
Yes.
And I think that we're going to see that story. We see it throughout the Bible, but it's going to happen in the future as well. And so we have to watch what God does through Israel. And so it is important for us to debate and discuss, like, what do these prophecies mean, and what chapter are we in, and how does that relate to, and then just having enormous sympathy for the fact that the Jewish people, because they exist upon that really difficult stage of the revelation of God's character.
Yeah.
That is a tough position to wrestle with God in that way. And so I think there's got to be a high level of sympathy for the challenge that creates, and a desire to honor, as Paul really describes in Romans 11, honor the older brother for their role in the story, knowing that sometimes it's going to go really bad for them, and we are but we are all cheering for the veil to come off and for them to see Yeshua as the Messiah. Like that moment's coming.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, this is good. Thanks, Lucas. I love getting to have these deep conversations. That was great.
All right. See you, buddy.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.